Okay, we are here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia. This is Hall Monitor, the program where we discuss local government, politics, consumer affairs, and much, much more. My name is Larry McGlynn, and I am joined by Denise Clay Murray. Denise, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And consumer reporter Lance Haver. Lance, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, enjoying spring weather.
Yeah, for at least a day, because tomorrow it looks like it's going to be cold and rainy again
Oh,
for a
lovely.
while.
It just makes us appreciate the good days more.
That is true.
It also shows that, when people tell you that there is no such thing as climate change, they obviously don't live on the East Coast.
Just go back and look at the weather reports for the last couple of months,
Uh-huh.
and what happened, and that tells you all you need to know.
Uh-huh.
But we have a big show tonight. We'll be running an interview with State Representative Joanna McClinton, where we talked about voting rights, amongst other things, other issues going on in Harrisburg. And Lance, tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk to us about in the second half of the show.
Everybody who opened up their PGW bill was probably surprised to see such a large increase.
I was.
I'm going to talk about why the bills are so high, what PGW could have done, should have done, and what people can really do to defend themselves so that they can take the appropriate steps to keep bills within their reach. And finally, talk about the PGW and the city's decision to use PGW as a way of collecting a sales tax to take care of the anti-poverty program of helping people with their gas bills, and how strange that is to think of paying for an anti-poverty program through gas bills as opposed to through the tax base.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to hearing those important stories in the second half of the show. But we're going to lead off with our interview with State Representative Joanna McClinton. Okay, we are here on WPPM 106.5 with Representative Joanna McClinton of the 191st District, and also the floor leader of the Democratic Caucus in the State House. Thank you so much for being with us.
So glad to be here. Thank you.
And we're very glad to have you at this point in time, because voting rights is fundamentally important, and it feels like it's something that's being attacked all over the country, including here in Pennsylvania. So what I'd like to do is, can you tell us just a little bit about the Leroy Herbis Voter Protection Act?
Absolutely. So we in Pennsylvania, particularly the House Democratic Caucus, which I'm so humbled to be able to lead this session, we introduced this bill in January just to make sure that we can defend democracy and protect everybody's ability to participate freely in elections and know that the election is a safe, secure process. And what this bill will do when it's enacted, this bill will make voting easier by making sure that we have mail-in ballots as a permanent option here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It'll also make sure that there are more drop boxes accessible so that people can put their ballots in a drop box that is secure and that is monitored. And it will even allow people who have just relocated to be able to register to vote in the same day. So it'll add a bit of protection and making sure that all of our counties are supported as they administer our local elections.
And the drop boxes and the voting, the mail-in balloting is so important and so useful and helps so much. So it's good to hear that that's one of the ways we're moving. So what I'd like to ask you about, we're seeing, I don't know, the opposition to making voting easier. Is this something that you're seeing at this height for the first time, or has this been something consistent in your experience in the State House?
What we are saying is that with more and more people deciding to participate and exercise their right to vote, particularly in the 2020 election, we had so many more Pennsylvanians who had never voted, and that is because of vote by mail. We are seeing an attack on our democracy. It is very unfortunate. And as you said in the introduction, it's not only in Pennsylvania. Over 30 bills passed in 20 states last year in 2021 alone to change the voting laws and to make them different, arguably. But I'd say they really made new restrictions in this era.
And so this next question, I try to think of different ways to word it, but this is the only way I could really think of it. how do you manage to work with other members of the House who are not only actively trying to limit voting rights in Pennsylvania, but also are so biased against Philadelphia in terms of school funding, gun laws, all these other things? How does that work for you? And is there any way to find consensus with the other side?
So there absolutely is always a way to find consensus. I'm sure everybody has heard the saying, where there is a will, there is a way. The key is having the political will and the courage to do something. And so many of my colleagues across the aisle represent a variety of rural counties whose county commissioners have said, we need to have pre-canvassing as a part of the law. We need to be able to make sure there are more drop boxes. And because these requests have been made by their very own constituents, I am excited and confident to know that there will be a response, because there is going to be a will. We are in the minority, but we're beating the drum, reminding everybody how important it is that people are able to vote without limit. And while these attacks aren't new, because throughout our entire history as a nation, someone says it's, perfect experiment. We've always seen attacks on voting rights and restrictions that we've had to break down, whether we're talking about women's right to vote or people of color, specifically African Americans' right to vote. We've had to fight, and we continue to fight. And I know that there will be a will so that this gets done.
Politically, Pennsylvania is an incredibly diverse state in many different ways, but especially politically. When you look at your role as a state representative, especially in leadership, how do you balance the needs of different members from different parts of the state whose needs are so different than ours? But really, anything you do is going to affect everything. How does that work?
So the best thing to know is that while we are beautifully diverse, rural, urban, suburban, we have common denominators. Some of them are school funding. School funding, for instance, it unites those of us who are in cities and large districts that are underfunded with those who are in rural communities that have not experienced major growth in their tax base, and they too are underfunded by the state. So we're able to get common denominators, issues that we all care about, that bring us together to be able to argue and advocate, most importantly, for those issues to have progress in the law.
Are you concerned that in the long run, a lot of people will tell you you need both sides to make it work. You need Democrats and Republicans. Are you concerned that the moderate element of the Republican Party is fading out, and the only people that you're going to have left to work with are these far right people who are antithetical to anything that Philadelphians would want to see?
So one thing that I have experienced in my years in the House, and they are not as plenteous as so many that have served before me, and of course some that are in the chamber now that have been there, I won't say it, but for my lifetime. But I will say that people have gotten used to, in this term and the term before, instead of building consensus, just not doing anything. Inaction seems to be favored over action. And it is very concerning that, whether you're conservative or moderate, wherever you fall on the spectrum, that people are saying, we don't have to do much. And it's like, no, we are elected to do work. We are elected to come into this building, and we have a very incredible democratic process that we're supposed to be able to sit down and work together. So I have not lost faith, and I definitely know that we have so much to do, whether we're talking about, safely getting everybody through the pandemic, getting out some of the federal care dollars that we receive from Washington, D.C. We have things that we have to do and that we can do together.
And what is the cause of that inaction that you were talking about?
Well, a lot of times it is political. It is deeply rooted in which party's in the White House, which party's in the governor's office. So much is a blame game, as opposed to saying, what can we do together? How can we be not necessarily united front in November, because we have some issues that we'll never see eye to eye on. But when we're thinking about 5 issues, there's at least 3 that we see the same way. And if we emphasize on the issues that are important to all of our constituents collectively, lowering property taxes, funding public schools, raising the minimum wage, these ideas are wildly popular amongst Pennsylvanians of all sorts of race backgrounds, ethnicity, political affiliation. If we would unite on those issues, we'd be more productive. And I think that there's a time coming, particularly during this digital age where people have been tuning in much more because of challenges throughout the pandemic, where they're going to demand that if we are not more active, that there'll be other people elected to do what needs to be done.
I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on WPPM 106.5.
Hi, and thank you for joining us, Minority Leader. We really appreciate it. I guess my question, to kind of piggyback on what you were talking about the inherent desire for bipartisanship on the part of your Republican colleagues in the House. If your constituent, I was always brought up to believe that when it comes to politics, your constituents determine what you do and where you go. If their constituents are telling them, these are the things we need more money for schools, we need voting rights to be secure, we need all of these things. What is the problem? Is there too much noise coming from the national party to make the local party not necessarily want to compromise? Or is this just the local party itself deciding that, we don't feel like we like stasis rather than movement?
So unfortunately, Denise, the status quo has just become so much of an excuse for somebody to come out and say, we tried, but we couldn't do it, but there's always next year, vote for me one time. People are hearing that a lot, and they're getting a ton of excuses. And we certainly saw seeds of chaos, doubt, and disruption as a fallout to our 2020 election. And we saw, in what I believe is, a ton of deceit in the last leader of the Republican Party. And as a result, it has definitely come down to local level government and seeing so many in different offices not governing, but rather continuing this spin out cycle of chaos as an excuse of we can't do anything, we cannot get anything done. And it's unfortunate.
Now, it's budget season in Harrisburg, and Governor Wolf announced his budget, which included more money for school funding and different things. There is a fairly sizable surplus that's sitting in the coffers of Harrisburg that was partially brought on by the money that the state got from the American Rescue Plan. How are negotiations going right now in terms of getting some of that money and applying it to things like school funding?
So it is definitely budget season in the Pennsylvania House and the Pennsylvania Senate. In the House, our appropriations meetings have begun, and every single department that we fund to provide a variety of services to our neighbors across the state, they are testifying. They're making their requests for the next season. They're asking for resources. They're talking about programs they have in mind that will help combat the opioid crisis, the gun violence crisis, you name it. We have different entities testifying. So that is the first step. After we wrap up these hearings, negotiations will begin in the springtime, and June 30th is our deadline. So I anticipate that we will be able to get into that federal funding and into the natural surplus that we have thanks to our Governor Tom Wolf's financial stewardship. We've got a surplus, and when he started, we were in a structural deficit for year after year after year until the last 3 years. So that being said, we have got to get that funding to the schools, to the districts, because this will in turn lower people's property taxes. It will help them, in their bottom line to know that your child can go to a great school across from your house or one school bus ride away, and that when your next tax bill comes, it can be lower because the state has finally done its job. I mean, that's talking about something that will really help advance families all across our Commonwealth.
Now, you talked a little bit about the rural versus urban divide when it comes to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I think it was James Carville who described Pennsylvania as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between. When you talk to your colleagues about the issues that are, that are Philadelphia, that are perceived to be Philadelphia issues, but really aren't, I mean, even gun violence is a statewide issue. What are those conversations like? And what have you been able to help them understand better about the city? And in turn, what have they helped you been able to better understand about where there are the rural areas?
Well, the saying goes, Denise, I can show you better than I can tell you. And in my years in Harrisburg, I have made the best decision to bring people to areas of concern in my community to see it for themselves, because many times, although I'm a trusted messenger, it's not like being it. And I'll give an example. We have been working and we continue to work to change the laws that govern beer to go distributors and stop and goes, which we colloquially call these areas in our city, at least in Philadelphia. And these are sometimes just called delis, but there's no sandwiches served, and that's a whole nother conversation. But when I have brought my colleagues from different parts of the Commonwealth, even from as close to Bucks County, to see the issues and the problems that one business with a certain license and not enough ability from liquor control enforcement at the state level to monitor the situations, they are shocked. They're like, wow, I never let them have a business like this in my community. I never give this person a license again. And they're able to see things in a different way. And as someone who's been in the city my entire life, when I get to go to the rural areas in our Commonwealth and get to see how challenging it can be when there's not a ton of infrastructure, when you have to wait on state police to come for a crisis, when you have to drive an hour to a hospital, when the jobs that were, a mile or a few miles down the road, the factories closed. Me coming to areas and seeing that for myself, I'm able to say, okay, I understand and I get it. So we continue to do efforts like that because that's able to sanitize the whole situation. Everybody who does not live in the city thinks, oh, you got public transportation, you've got hospitals everywhere, you all are doing very well down there. You don't have any real problems. And we think, oh, there's lots of things that are great to live in a rural community. You don't have any problems. You don't have people that are using opioids. You don't have people that are, committing suicide by gun. But the truth of the matter is the leading cause of death for gun violence in the Commonwealth is among white men by suicide outside of our cities. So these issues are actually common. These issues we share. And the more we're able to almost sit down at the table and break bread together, the more we're able to see it from the other eye and perspective, and hopefully not just see it, but respond to these issues.
Okay, thank you so much. And Larry, did you have another question?
Yeah, I'd like to finish up with just one thing. Usually, we deal with mostly local politicians and local issues. But so that's why it's such a treat to have you with us here today. And I guess the last thing I'd like to ask you, we focus a lot on anti-poverty legislation, things like that. You already have your hands full with the Voter Protection Act and budget season coming up. But is there any other work that you or your colleagues are doing that can help alleviate poverty here in Philadelphia?
Absolutely. The fact that we are the poorest big city with some of the most profitable international, multinational corporations located here, it's astonishing. It makes no sense, and it is certainly unacceptable. So when we talk about the fight locally against poverty, what we can do in Harrisburg, the first thing that we absolutely must do is raise the minimum wage. The fact that it's $7.25, and we have grown-ups who are trying to keep a roof over their head, take care of their families, working more than one of these jobs is just unacceptable. We have got to raise the wage. We have to push it all the way up, because you cannot afford an apartment in Philly or anywhere, but especially here when we're talking about that low wage. It's a poverty wage. It's a wage that's cyclical, because people say that's the floor. So, oh, I'll pay you $8.50 or I'll pay you $9. But it's like, no, it's still not enough. In addition to raising the wage, we have to expand the child tax credit. We have to make sure that working families have every benefit that's accessible. And I know it's not in the current budget plan, but in the governor's proposal from last year, he was really trying to change the way families are taxed. And the average salary across the whole state is $53,000. So the idea of reducing income tax for people making that type of wage is something that we can also do on the state level to reduce poverty. And then the next thing we have to do is really see what we can do about the instability in our housing market. I don't know how many of you scroll through to see houses in your neighborhood, what the prices are, what the availability is. We're in a crisis. We are literally in a crisis. Families that have, their most horrific thing, like a fire, they, might even have the insurance, but they cannot find a new place to live, or they cannot afford a new place to live. So there's so much work to be done around making sure that we can bring stability for housing, because these things, if we can attack poverty, some of the other issues that are right in our face, people being addicted to opioids, people, choosing violence, like these things would certainly decrease.
Representative McGlynn, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity.
Okay, we would like to thank Representative McGlynn for being with us. We recorded that last week, actually, so joining us last week to be on with us. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Lance Haver. Lance, tell us about what's going on with PGW right now.
So PGW has sent out their January and February bills, and many people who have opened them up have actually been shocked to see how high they are. And it's really unclear what's happening. So I prepared a PowerPoint presentation to help people understand what's going on with their bills. But before we start that, I want to just talk about what PGW is. It is the largest municipally owned gas utility in the nation. And once we're finished with the presentation, I know people are going to be wondering, well, why didn't we sell it? Why didn't we privatize it? And the answer is privatizing a utility forces rates up, not down. And the reason for that is really very simple. A municipal utility doesn't pay taxes, and they don't pay dividends, and the salaries of their CEOs, COOs, and CFOs are much lower than for a private profit-making utility. So the problems at PGW are vast, and they're basically have to do with the level of poverty in the city. Selling the gas works to somebody who is going to try and squeeze every single penny out of it possible is not going to lower rates. It will do just the opposite. So why are the bills so high? What could have PGW done? What could they do now to make sure that bills stay affordable? And I'm not sure if I can click to the next slide. No, okay. So I know everybody has a gas bill, and but few of us actually read the gas bills and make sense of them. So what are we being charged with? The bill is incredibly complicated, and I don't think that's an accident. I think that's something that happens because it makes it harder to figure out who's at fault when the bills go up. So the parts of the bills that we pay are the actual cost of natural gas, which is called a commodity. We pay for getting that gas into our homes, which is called a delivery charge. We also pay for a basic service of maintaining the bills, sending us bills on a regular basis, reading the meters, and keeping the infrastructure up. So that's a customer service charge. Then we pay what's called a gas cost adjustment. And that is the price of natural gas as it goes up and it goes down, changes. And those changes are automatically passed through to us. And that's, again, a separate charge. And then there are two other charges that are really very confusing. And I'm glad people are listening to us on WPPM 106.5 FM and watching us on Comcast Television and Fios Television. So the two charges that are really hard to understand is a weather normalization adjustment and a cost for fixing the pipes. So first, the weather normalization adjustment is an understanding that the less we use, of natural gas, the more there has to be charged for keeping the infrastructure up. So when we have a warm winter, what ends up happening is the rates go up for the weatherization normalization adjustment. And recently, the Public Utility Commission, which now regulates PGW, has added still another charge, and that other charge is to take care of the decaying infrastructure, the old infrastructure. And that is something that used to be in the regular rates, but it's now a separate item, and that's called a distribution system improvement charge, and that's 7.5%. In addition, there's a city sales tax and a state sales tax. So when you add up all of those different charges, that's when you end up seeing what the bill is. So what has happened to create the bills going so large? What has actually changed? If we can go to the next slide. So as I said, the commodity charge is the charge of gas. The gas comes from the wellhead, it goes through the pipes and comes here. The customer charges is a monthly charge to cover reading the meter, sending out the bills, maintaining the lines, and doing all of the things that have to be done, whether you use a little bit of gas or you use a lot of gas. The distribution charges are the charges for getting gas to come from the wellhead through the pipes into our homes. And then, as I said, there are the three things that are really hard to understand. The distribution system improvement charge, which is a surcharge because PGW didn't replace their pipes in a timely manner and has really turned its back on any innovation and any new ways of repairing or replacing the pipes. Instead of doing that, instead of having a national competition for looking at the most cost-effective way of relining the old cast iron pipes, what PGW did was say, we're just simply going to have another increase in rates, and we're going to call it something that no one's going to ever figure out what it is, and that's a distribution system improvement charge. Then there's the gas cost adjustments. As the price of natural gas goes up, the price gets passed on to us. And finally, as I said, there's the weather normalization adjustment. So if it's a warm winter, they raise the rates on us because we're using less. If it's a cold winter, the rates are supposed to go down. If we could go to the next slide. So was it colder this January? Is that why people's bills are so much higher? This comes directly from a PGW bill. And what it says is for January and February, the current months were 34 degrees, and last year it was 34 degrees. So it's the same temperature, the same average temperature. So it's not like it's a much colder month and people had to use more heat and burn more gas to keep their homes warm. It's the same amount. And as I said, if we go to the next slide, even if it had been colder, and I apologize that I see this is hard to read, but even if it had been much colder, it wouldn't have caused the spike in the bills that we're seeing because of that weather normalization adjustment. So we are supposed to be held harmless from cold winters because the rates are supposed to go down when the winter is cold, and the rates go up when the winter is warm, so we don't see the same reduction. It's balancing act, and we do that. The reason why the rates have gone up so high is because the price of natural gas has gone up, and PGW wasn't able to do anything about it. So as you can see, this comes from the gas company's filing. Every quarter, PGW files with the Public Utility Commission something saying, what is PGW paying for natural gas? And you can see it went from 0.4875 to 0.60 cents per 100 cubic feet. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later about what PGW could have done so that this increase wasn't passed on directly. But right now, even if you accept that they couldn't have done anything, they certainly could have told us it was coming. They knew that the rates were going to skyrocket on December 1st when they filed and got this rate increase. And yet they didn't say anything. Nobody expected it. hall monitor, we've been talking about the price of natural gas going up on the market, but PGW didn't take any public service announcement, didn't send anything in the bills, didn't warn consumers, hey, put some money aside because the price of gas has gone up so much, you're going to see a very large bill. If we could skip to the next slide. So, as I said, natural gas bills are trading much higher than what they have been. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But the biggest reason is because the people who control the wells have decided not to produce as much natural gas. If you think about it for a second, it makes perfect sense. The gas underground in the well goes up in value when the companies that control the inventories don't pump it out as much. And so what they've done successfully is force up the price of natural gas by limiting how much natural gas is going into the pipelines. And they're also taking some of that natural gas out and liquefying it to a product called liquefied natural gas. And that liquefied natural gas is what we're now talking about selling to the European countries that are no longer going to be buying natural gas from Russia. So the inventories, what's stored, has gone down much more than normal in past winters. And much of that gas that was pumped out is now being liquefied and sent to Europe and Asia, so that the people who control the gas inventories have created a shortage. And as a result of the shortage, the price has gone up. So it's true. There's no way about it. There's a 23% increase in natural gas from 0.48 cents per 100 cubic foot to 0.67 per 100 cubic foot. That increase is there. And that is not something that PGW could have controlled. But they certainly could have done something about it. I'm sorry, if we could go to the next. So here's one of the things that we're looking at. PGW, on the back of the last page of PGW's bill, talks about another rate increase. They say on January 21st, the distribution charge, now that's not the price of natural gas, that's the price of getting the gas into our homes, is going up. And you can see the increase is very small. They're saying it's only going to be about $41 a year per person. But in this PGW message, nothing says, by the way, the price of natural gas is going to skyrocket, and you're going to see your bill in January and February go up by 2 or 3 times what's normal. And this is an example of how PGW doesn't really consider what people's lives are like. Because most of us are budgeting, most of us are living close to the edge. And PGW, as I showed, knew on December 1st of last year that the natural gas prices skyrocket. And they knew that the distribution charge was going to go up. But the way they tell us to be careful and the way they warn us is on the page 4 of a 4-page bill in the back in a little box that says PGW messages. And they don't warn us, they don't prepare us, and they don't tell us what we can do. If we could go to the next slide. Okay. So in January, on top of the increase in the price of natural gas, which again, PGW doesn't control the price of natural gas at the well, but can control how much we pay for it. On top of that, PGW raised what's called their base rates, and that is the price that we pay to maintain the system. And so it was a 3% increase in the customer service charge. That's the charge for keeping the meter, sending out the bills, and keeping the pipes. And a 3.7% increase in the delivery charge. That's the charge for getting the gas from the wellhead through the pipes into our homes. So you can see there are really 3 rate increases that are going forward. And those 3 rate increases, PGW would have us believe that there's really nothing they could have done about it. But let's talk about the price of natural gas. Could PGW have avoided the spike? And while we don't know the answer to that, we have every reason to ask the questions. PGW can store up to 4 billion cubic feet of natural gas. This is in storage areas that the ratepayers have paid for. We own them, they're ours. And that allows PGW to buy gas during the summer when the price is very low and store it when we need it during the winter. The pipeline that brings gas to us can only carry up to 300 million cubic feet of gas per day. So there's a real limitation on what happens on a cold day. We've been enjoying some spring weather. Tomorrow and Friday are supposed to be cold again, and the amount of gas that we're going to use may exceed the amount of gas that can come through the pipeline. On a peak day, which is defined as the day that's estimated when the most gas is sold, the city of Philadelphia uses 700 million cubic feet of gas. PGW can use its storage to release gas it bought in the summer. And that gas, of course, is a much lower price because there's not a lot of demand on it. And store it and then release it to save money. That's in effect what had been happening in the past. Under the old management of PGW, the people who bought gas would purposely buy as much gas as they thought they needed during the summer and store it, and then buy a little bit of gas under contract and buy a little bit of gas later on what's called the spot market. Now, the leadership of PGW has changed. The old manager, Craig White, has left, and Mr. Shapiro is the new CEO of the gas works. Now, Mr. Shapiro has never worked for, led a gas utility or any type of utility for that matter. He was on the board of the directors of PGW, but he never worked for a utility and he never ran a utility. And it's too soon to know whether he has made an error which has caused the spike. Did PGW buy and store enough gas during the summer? And is it the gas that it did buy and is it storing, what is it doing with it? Because one of the reasons why we want to oppose the privatization of the gas works is if a private company bought the gas works, they could use all that storage space, load up on the low-cost natural gas, and then resell it back into the system when the price was high. That wouldn't affect rates. That would just affect their profit. And it's too soon to know whether PGW is selling the gas that they paid for low price or whether they're sending it to us so that the rate increase on the price of natural gas was unnecessary. And this is a real concern. It's very difficult. We all tend to think that running a utility should be relatively easy, but we live in a city which unfortunately is very poor, and we have significant problems with our aging infrastructure. And you have to wonder about the wisdom of hiring someone to run it who's never worked for a utility, never led a utility, let alone a gas utility. We could go to the next page. The second reason why our bills are so high is because PGW collects a sales tax on natural gas to pay for programs to help low-income citizens keep up with the rising bills. So there's 600,000 homes in Philadelphia that use natural gas. 10%, 118,000 of those spend more than 10% of their income on utilities, which is defined as an extreme energy burden. 100,000 Philadelphians pay 6% of their income as the energy burden. So you end up looking at 225,000, 40% of us are really struggling to pay our bills. And the Gas Works has a number of great programs to help low-income people keep their utilities on. We have the CRP program, which is a great program. There are other utilities across the country that look at it and say, we ought to have a program like this. The problem is, who pays for that subsidy? How do we raise the money that we need to pay for these low-income programs? And unlike other poverty programs, or I should say, unlike other anti-poverty programs that are paid for out of our taxes, which are more progressive, which are based on ability to pay and based on how high your income is, the PGW low-income plan, and again, it's a great plan, but the way we fund it is by raising everyone's gas bills. If we could go to the next slide. So almost a third of our bills are the tax to pay, to take care of, to ensure that no one goes without heat in the winter. And I'm not suggesting for a second that that isn't a goal that we have to meet. No one should freeze to death. No one should be without gas. No one should be forced to live without a basic necessity of life. The issue I'm trying to raise is who should pay for that subsidy? Should that subsidy be paid for? Should that anti-poverty plan be paid for based on a tax on a basic necessity of life? Taxing water, taxing natural gas, taxing food are all examples of taxes that violate the very concept of progressive tax guidelines. Utility bills, by their very nature, are regressive. The less one makes, the higher percentage of income one spends on utilities. So as we saw, almost 40% of us are really struggling to keep up with the utility bills. And a big part of that is because a third of those bills are going to support the anti-poverty programs. And unlike taxes, even Philadelphia's wage tax, which is a flat tax, meaning it's the same amounts paid by everyone. And it's only a wage tax, it's not an income tax. So people who make their living with dividends and buying and selling stocks and work for corporations that pay them in a different way than wages, they don't pay it. But even the wage tax is much more progressive than utility bills, because a wage tax, the more you make, the more you pay. On a utility bill tax, the less you make, the higher your percentage of tax you pay. And finally, Pennsylvania is the only state, the only cold weather state in the nation that doesn't have a low income plan, that doesn't do something to make sure that we help people who are struggling. So what could PGW do? What can PGW do? It can better manage its purchase and release of out-of-season natural gas. We have this unbelievably wonderful structure that allows us to buy gas in the summer, store it, and then use it when we need it in the winter. We can better manage that to take the spikes off of the market. We can use the fact that we have so many low-income people who are struggling, and it's a city utility, to set up a national competition to help people develop new insulating technologies. If you think about it for more than a second, we're still insulating in the same way that we did 40 years ago or 50 years ago. Anybody who turns on a computer and thinks that the way we're doing insulation is the same way we were doing it before computers were in every household, before people could afford it, would be shocked. Why can't we use our universities and our think tanks and our creativity to develop new ways to insulate our homes? And why can't PGW be at the forefront of that and say, we're going to give 100 homes to any company that's going to come in and show us how they have a new insulating technology. And we're going to agree that if this insulating technology works and the company's willing to locate in Philadelphia, we're going to buy from that company and we're going to help insulate people's homes so the usage goes down and the need to subsidize goes down and the bills don't have to continue to go up. PGW could ask the Public Utility Commission to force the tax base, not the utility base, to pay for the anti-poverty programs. Again, the programs are necessary, unfortunately, until we raise the minimum wage, until we have living wage jobs. People are going to struggle to pay their utility bills. The question is, where should the subsidy come from? Should it come from people who are struggling to pay their utility bills, or should it come from the tax base, which includes businesses and is based on progressivity? The more you make, the more you pay. Which one of those is a better way to pay for poverty programs? At the heart of the question, it is who should be responsible for helping lift people out of poverty? People who pay gas bills, or all of us, all of the tax base, everybody? PGW should be asking the city to use some of the COVID dollars to cover the cost of the anti-programs, at least this year, for one time. And finally, PGW should spread out the high bills over a year's time without interest. Now, they kind of do that. People can sign up for a budget plan, which divides the whole bill into 12 equal sections. But PGW isn't talking about that. They don't help people understand that. And they certainly know what the spike is because they're filing all of these requests and all of these applications with the Public Utility Commission, and they're getting the results, and they know that they're getting those increases. So they're not unaware of how much bills are going up. The problem is they're unwilling to do anything to help people who are struggling other than what they normally do. So if we can go to the next one. So what can you do? What can we do? What can we do to try and stop the bills from going up so much? I spoke about weatherization, but the major savings in weatherization is something called a setback thermostat. I know a lot of people have them, still some people don't. What an automatic setback thermostat does is you set it to turn the heat down during the night and during the day when you're not home. So if you normally keep it at 74 degrees, at night, you can turn it back to 68 degrees. And there's really very little reason to keep your entire living space at 74 degrees when you're in your bedroom sleeping. And there's really very little reason to keep your entire living space at 74 degrees when no one's at home. So that is the best investment someone can do to keep their costs down. And that is to either get an automatic setback thermostat or simply to get into the habit of turning your thermostat down at night when you go to sleep and turn it on in the morning. Now, the reason why I think a setback thermostat is better is because most of us don't like to wake up to the cold. And if you have an automatic setback thermostat, it can turn the heat up a half an hour before you get out of bed, as opposed to you having to get out of bed and turn up the thermostat. Second thing is, of course, is you can seal all air leaks. Again, something people should try and do. Doesn't solve all the problems, but it's an immediate solution. If you own your home or you have a landlord you can work with, you can try and add insulation. Again, it would be better if PGW were in the forefront of developing new insulations. One of the major problems we have in Philadelphia with insulating homes is our housing stock in many neighborhoods is in such poor condition that the insulation won't work. So you have to deal with the roof, you have to deal with leaky pipes, you have to deal with leaky windows, you have to deal with all of those things for the insulation to work. And it's always nice to say insulate, 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 but we have to be realistic. If a house has got other core problems, if the roof isn't secure, if the windows aren't secure, if the pipes are leaking, putting in insulation, the current type of insulation that we've been using for the last 50 years, will not solve the problem. And in many ways, it'll make it worse. We can ask our council people when they come out to run for re-election, why are anti-poverty programs funded with a tax on PGW bills? How does this make any sense at all? Why do you force people who just barely have their head above water pay a 33% increase in PGW bills, as opposed to taking the tax base, which is spread more equitably among everyone, to pay for these necessary programs? The programs are necessary. We need to support them. But who should pay for them is a different question than whether we should have them. We can say we should have them, but they should be paid for fairly, not by an unfair tax on a basic necessity of life. And finally, the council is doing a great job investigating how PGW will transition to a sustainable business. And while those hearings are going on for hours, and they're really excellent and very interesting to listen to, and maybe we can have some of the people who have testified come and talk with us a little later, but not a single one of the council people asked the CEO of the gasworks, why are the bills so high? What happened? Why, when I opened up my January bill, did I have such a surprise that the bills were so high? And finally, the last thing that you can do is, if you're active in your neighborhood group or you're a block captain, or you know people who are struggling, get them to apply for LAHEAP. LAHEAP is the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. Every penny of LAHEAP comes from federal dollars. Every dollar that we get into Philadelphia goes to the gasworks or the electric company, the water department. And when we bring those money in, we lower the amount that has to be given to help people keep their heat on. So every dollar that comes in from LAHEAP means that there's less of a need for subsidy from other ratepayers. And these are the steps that we can take. One, we should hold PGW accountable. It is, as I said, a municipal utility. It should be serving the public interest. It should be in the forefront of developing new conservation techniques. It should be in the forefront of telling consumers what's happening. And it really should do a much better job of monitoring the price of gas and using that wonderful storage that we have to our advantage. So we don't have to open up our gas bills in January and go, I don't know how I'm going to pay this. And there are steps that we can take, again, that will make it easier. Setback thermostats, seal off drafts, and if you haven't already, think about switching to a monthly bill, meaning that you pay the same amount every month. Now, again, if you were on one of those programs and you thought that you were safe, unfortunately what happened, because the rate increase in price of natural gas was so high, and added to that was the base rate increase and the increase in the customer service charge, they would have to readjust your budget plan, and you would have seen a major jump anyway. But now, if you're struggling and you don't think that you have the money without taking away from some other basic need, contact PGW, get yourself on a budget plan. Don't take away from what else you need because PGW has sent you a surprise bill. And that's my report on PGW. I'm happy to talk a little more about what's going on, but these are the situations that we face. PGW didn't do a good job of buying gas this year. Whether that's because of the new CEO or not, we don't know yet. PGW didn't warn us that the rates were going to skyrocket. For whatever reason, PGW decided to raise their base rates and their customer service charge at the same time that there was a 30% raise in the price of natural gas. And they didn't warn us it was coming.
Well, Lance, thank you so much for doing all that work. And you know, a couple of the things that you had talked about were things that we discussed off the air as well. But one thing I want to mention, it was before December, you were talking about PGW buying gas before the prices went up. You were talking about that. I believe you spoke about it on this program.
Yes.
And if that didn't happen, that's a major miscarriage on their part.
We don't know yet.
Right.
And you know, that's part of the difficulty. We're going to have to wait for the next round of hearings where they're going to adjust the price of natural gas, the gas cost recovery. And then we'll find out what happened, how much they bought. Again, this winter, even though some of us thought it was colder than past winter, turns out, according to PGW, it's pretty much the same winter. And utilities talk about something called degree days. And without wasting a lot of time, basically all that means is the colder it is, the more gas you burn. The warmer it is, the less gas you burn. And we know that. We know that if there's a significant colder day, people burn more gas, which is why PGW has the weatherization clause. Now, they actually wanted it for the other reason. As the winters warmed up and they weren't selling as much gas, they needed to raise rates to be able to pay their bonds. And hopefully we'll find out, and hopefully it's not the fault of the new CEO, and we're going to find out he did everything he could and that there was nothing that could have been done. But again, they knew on December 1st that this was coming, and they kept it quiet. They didn't hold a press conference. They didn't say, look, we have a problem here. They didn't say, prepare, come in and talk with us now, get on the budget now. They are circulating information, asking people to sign up for LAHEAP. But again, they have to recognize that that's very difficult and that they don't go and figure out new ways of doing it in the same way that we know it's hard to get people to sign up for the Earned Income Tax Credit or to sign up for SNAP, the new name for the old food stamps. We know it's hard to get people to sign up for LAHEAP, and PGW doesn't try new programs. For example, they should be contacting us. They should be asking us, would you please publicize how somebody gets LAHEAP? And not just us, but everybody. They should have, they should hire block captains. They should go to the registered community organizations, the RCO, and say, hey, look, we'll give you $100 if you'll send someone door knocking in your neighborhood to get people to sign up for LAHEAP. Because a LAHEAP grant, if you spend $100 to bring in $1,500, that's a great bargain. If you spend $1,000 to bring in $15,000, that's a great bargain. So PGW does the minimal. You know, they take out some ads in the Tribune and in the Philadelphia Sunday Sun. They put some ads on WURD. But those people who are reading those papers and listening to URD are people who tend to be better connected. They don't go beyond that to reach the people who, for whatever reason, and we could guess, but for whatever reason are disconnected. They don't get information. They don't know what's going on, and they may not know about these programs. And until we reach out and do that, we're going to have a very difficult time, and we're going to leave literally tens of thousands of dollars in the federal budget that we could desperately use.
Now, the cynic in me, and it's a pretty large cynic, but the cynic in me says that part of the reason that people were not notified about these rate increases is because nothing makes you angrier than getting hit with a large gas and or electric bill, which makes the utility a little easier to sell. Is there still talk about selling PGW? And like I said, the cynic in me says that, you know, if you make enough people angry with like 3-figure gas bills, they're like, oh, you know, maybe we should privatize.
Well, there's no doubt that there will be a call for that. Some of the people opening their gas bills are going to say that. But there is no real economic analysis that would suggest that privatizing the gas works, which would mean utilities are very capital intensive, so they all borrow money. A municipal authority, a municipal utility borrows at a lower rate than a private utility. All private utilities have to pay a dividend, and all private utilities have to pay taxes. The only way that this would work would be if they turned off those 118,000 families and say, we don't care that you can't afford your bill. That's the only way that a private utility could keep rates where they are. And I honestly don't believe the city of Philadelphia, the mayor or council would allow that to happen. But you could be right. I mean, I don't claim to have great knowledge about whether that's part of the plan. It's just on an economic analysis, it will not work unless you want to treat people in an inhumane way.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for being with us tonight on Hall Monitor. And next week, we're going to be talking about the redistricting maps that just came out today. We were hoping maybe be able to get a little bit of that in tonight, but we weren't able to. So we will next week. We're going to talk about that. And we'll also be talking more about housing next week. And for our big spring coverage project, we'll be talking a little bit about the budget, which will be unofficially starting, if not next week, the week after, with the mayor's budget address. That date has not been chosen yet, but it should be. We should know pretty soon about that.
So I'm very anxious to see what the city is planning to do about the stadium bonds and the convention center bonds, because they were closed and the revenues were way down. I wonder whether they're going to ask the bondholders to accept a partial payment until next year, when the stadium is going to be open and the convention center is going to be open for an entire fiscal year. I'm curious about who comes first. Do poor people come first, or do bondholders come first? So I'm interested to hear Ms. Waxman talk on that.
Yeah, I am excited to hear about that, because it's very important. We need to know what's going to be happening. So we're going to be talking about that next week, and we will see you then.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.